time and extra effort to produce 6 nuclear weapons at a minimum. What I want people to understand is that the Iranians claim that they enrich for peaceful nuclear power purposes, that their enrichment program is designed to make sure they have fuel for their reactor, their peaceful nuclear reactor. The question becomes, how much of the enriched uranium have they used regarding the Bashir reactor? Not 1 gram. They get their spent fuel to run the reactor from the Russians. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with Iran having peaceful nuclear power. I'm okay with them building new nuclear power plants as long as they don't enrich. That the nuclear fuel supply comes from outside of Iran, it will be completely controlled. I'm okay with a 1-2-3 agreement with Iran like we have with the United Arab Emirates after they completely dismantle their enrichment program. And the history of this program is full of lying and cheating. The IAEA has caught Iran lying and cheating more times than I can count. So we're going to call the question sooner rather than later on Iran. This resolution by myself and Senator Cotton is designed to buy into the concept being pushed by the Trump administration. Complete dismantlement, and then, and only then, talking about a 1-2-3 arrangement for peaceful nuclear power. Anything short of that would be a bad deal. Anything short of that, I think, would ensure over time they get a nuclear weapon. President Trump, I spoke with him this weekend. He believes a nuclear weapon in the hands of Iran would be a nightmare for the world, and he is exactly right. So to the Iranian regime, you claim all you want is a peaceful nuclear power program, you can have it, but you cannot enrich. And you must dismantle, and you must dismantle now. If negotiation and diplomacy fails, we need to go to Plan B. And Plan B would be a military strike to stop the nuclear program in its tracks and degrade it as much as we can. I will turn it over to Senator Cotton now, but end with where I started. The world has many problems. Russia, Ukraine, we're in trade conflicts. I think we had some good news today with the UK, and it looks like the critical minerals deal was approved in Ukraine, which is good for the United States. But of all the problems that we're dealing with as a world and as a nation, the nuclear capability of Iran, their desire to continue to enrich at a level that has no commercial purpose. There is zero commercial purpose for uranium enriched at 60%. You only do that to have a threshold capability to make a weapon. And the difference between 60 and 90 is weeks, not months, not years. So we have laid out a resolution. We expect our colleagues in the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, who say they don't want a bomb, they oppose a bomb by Iran, to jump on board. We're reinforcing Secretary Rubio, Steve Witkoff, and the administration's position of dismantlement, and then, and only then, talking about a 1-2-3 agreement for peaceful nuclear power. I am hoping that we can get a lot of co-sponsors quickly. We can take this to the floor of the United States Senate and aid the effort that the Trump administration has embarked upon to make sure Iran never gets a nuclear bomb. Senator Cotton.
Thank you. Good morning. A horrible one-sided deal that should never, ever have been made. It didn't bring calm, it didn't bring peace, and it never will. Those words are as true today as they were 7 years ago today when President Trump said them, driving a stake through the heart of Barack Obama's disastrous nuclear deal with Iran. That deal was one-sided, in bad faith, and did nothing to stop Iran's march to a nuclear weapon. In fact, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, it didn't block Iran's path to a nuclear weapon, it paved the path. 4 years of impotent, inconsistent, and weak foreign policy during the Biden administration also gave Iran a golden opportunity to continue its development of nuclear weapons and to rebuild its economy after President Trump's successful maximum pressure policy during his first term, an opportunity that Iran's crazed theocratic ayatollahs took full advantage of. During the Biden administration, Iran began enriching uranium up to near weapons grade. In February of this year, the IAEA reported that Iran has between 5 and 7 metric tons of enriched uranium and more than 600 pounds of 60% highly enriched uranium. If further enriched, this is enough uranium for 6 nuclear weapons. Now, to be blunt, there's no benign or good reason for Iran to have any of this, and it's proof in and of itself that Iran cannot be trusted with key parts of the nuclear fuel cycle, particularly the infrastructure and expertise needed to enrich or reprocess uranium. This is what happens when a bad deal and indecisive American leadership leave Iran's nuclear ambitions virtually unchecked. Look at what Iran already does without nuclear weapons. They threaten American troops in the region. They support terrorism by arming Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Further, consider what Iran has also tried to do here: assassinate Donald Trump and other U.S. government current and former officials. All of this, again, done without Iran having the cover of a nuclear weapon. A nuclear Iran makes for a far more dangerous world. It would directly threaten the security of our homeland when married up to their intercontinental missile work. It encourages nuclear proliferation throughout the Middle East. It jeopardizes the safety of our men and women in uniform, and it poses an existential threat to our good friend Israel. So I'm not mincing words here, and neither has President Trump. Iran can never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, and Iran cannot be allowed to have a pathway to a nuclear weapon. As Senator Graham said, as President Trump has said, that means the complete dismantlement of its nuclear program. There is no reason for Iran to have centrifuges or to enrich uranium. So we urge our colleagues to support this resolution, which echoes the letter President Trump sent to the Supreme Leader of Iran 2 months ago. It also poses Iran with a simple choice. Iran can either have a nuclear weapon or a nuclear program that is lying in ruins, smoking, destroyed, and dismantled, or it can have a peaceful civilian nuclear power program with no centrifuges, no enriching, no reprocessing, and no pathway to a nuclear weapon. All of this will be done in a verifiable manner under IAEA safeguards. So we commend President Trump's consistent and unwavering efforts to prevent a nuclear Iran, and we look forward to working with him and the administration to achieve this goal. Thank you, and we'll now open the floor to questions.
Senator, what should our economic relationship with Iran look like after this deal?
Lindsey, do you want to take it? Me too.
I think it depends on what they do. It's just not the nuclear program. That's one of several things that have to change. If they dismantle their nuclear program in a way that would allow us to have a 1, 2, 3 agreement, that's the start. Their missile program must be deterred and changed. Their support for terrorism throughout the region must end. If they did all these things, maybe we could have a normal relationship with Iran on the economic front. The key word is normal. There's nothing normal about this regime. They openly talk about destroying the Jewish state, and today's the 80th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe, May 8th, I believe. 80 years ago today, we destroyed Nazi Germany that tried to kill all the Jews. And what Tom and I are doing, along with President Trump, is taking off the table to do that in 2025 and beyond. So I think this is a poetic day. It's the 60-day mark from the letter that President Trump sent to the Ayatollah. 60 days ago, he sent a letter. But it's the 80th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe that brought us the Holocaust. And I think our friends in Israel, one Holocaust is aplenty. So I am hoping to have a normal relationship with Iran, but they have to be normal, and they're anything but normal.
And I would add what President Trump and Senator Graham and I have long said is that while Iran has killed thousands of Americans and fomented terrorism and violence throughout the Middle East, it's worth remembering that the first and the worst victims of the Ayatollah's regime are the Iranian people themselves. And as President Trump has said, We would love for the Iranian people to live in peace and prosperity, but their regime has to behave like a normal regime. The nuclear weapons threat is the most urgent and most serious threat, but Iran still has a space launch program, which is flimsy cover for a ballistic missile program. It still supports terrorism. It still oppresses its own people. The United States imposes sanctions on Iran for all of those behaviors. So while we would welcome an end to Iran's nuclear weapons program, the easy way or the hard way, it would only be a first step towards having any kind of normal relationship with Tehran.
Senator Cotton, Iran is a lot weaker today than they were a year ago, or that Hezbollah has been eliminated as a proxy or seriously weakened. Their missile attack on Israel have been intercepted. What is your assessment on whether that makes them more likely to reach a deal along the lines that you have outlined today? And what is your assessment on how that has impacted their desire for a nuclear weapon or their decision-making on whether to restart their nuclear program?
Well, I think Iran has always lived in mortal terror of the United States and what the United States might do to the Ayatollahs, especially when we have a strong president like Donald Trump or Ronald Reagan. When President Trump directed the killing of Iran's terrorist mastermind in January of 2020, Iran largely pulled in its horns for the rest of President Trump's first term. When Ronald Reagan sank half of Iran's navy in 1988, Iran again pulled in its horns. It stopped mining the Arabian Gulf, and within just a few months, the 8-year Iran-Iraq war ended. A reporter asked President Reagan in the midst of that conflict as he walked across the South Lawn to Marine One if we were now at war with Iran. And Reagan chuckled, as he often did, and said, no, Iran wouldn't be so stupid. And Iran has been exposed in many ways over the last year, both through the destruction of most of its air and missile defenses by Israel in retaliation last year when Iran struck Israel, and also by the devastation that Israel has visited upon Hamas and Hezbollah, and that we've done to Iran's proxies in Yemen. So I think there's no question that Iran is in a much weaker position to deter military action if that's necessary to end its nuclear program. The president recognizes that. Leaders in the region recognize that. Most notably, the Ayatollahs recognize that. And I think they, again, are deathly afraid. Now, they probably hope that they can bluff the president or tap him along in a way that minimizes the threat to their nuclear weapons program. But the simplest way for them to avoid such action is to completely dismantle their program, to turn over their centrifuges, to turn over their uranium, and at that point, as Senator Graham has said, we could talk about some kind of civilian nuclear program, a program that a couple dozen nations around the world have, none of whom enrich uranium.
That's fine. That's good.
Does the Senate need to approve a deal in order for it to last into the future?
Well, I think obviously, if any other nation wants the most durable and lasting kind of agreement with the United States, it would be in a treaty form. And that was one reason why President Obama's deal was so weak, and something that I and Senator Graham and most other Republican senators cautioned the Ayatollahs about before reaching that deal, is that an agreement between the American president, whoever he or she may be, and a foreign leader can be reversed by future presidents, which President Trump rightly did 7 years ago today. So if they want the most durable and lasting kind of deal, then they'd want to bring it to the Senate and have it voted on as a treaty.
If I may, I think the statute that I think Senator Cotton helped lead regarding us having a say about the JCPOA, what's the name of that statute?
The Iran
Yeah.
Nuclear Agreement Review Act.
Yeah, so that allowed us to at least have a say about it. It wasn't a treaty. I think at a minimum that would happen, but I talked to actually Secretary Rubio about this. A treaty with Iran in this space is only possible if you get 67 votes. there's no way you're going to get 67 votes unless they completely dismantle and shut down the path that Senator Cotton has described toward a nuclear weapon in a way that's verifiable. But also, you're not going to get a 67 votes for a treaty regarding their nuclear program unless they deal with the missile program and their terrorism activity. So, is it possible? Yes, if Iran changes. I would urge the Ayatollah to seriously consider what Secretary Rubio and Witkoff are proposing. You can have what you claim you want, which is a peaceful nuclear power program, if you dismantle. But it's more than that. You can have a better relationship with the United States if you do the things that Senator Cotton laid out. Without fundamental change, there is no pathway to a treaty in the United States Senate.
And I would just add to that Senator Graham is right. I mean, Barack Obama's nuclear deal with Iran was hugely controversial because it was so weak, because it paved their path to a nuclear weapon. That's why it was opposed not just by Republicans, but by Democrats as well, to include Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate. I don't foresee a situation in which we'd be voting on a deal that would resemble anything like President Obama's deal, and therefore would be so hugely controversial. Secondarily, on the nuclear power front, it's also customary in some cases for the Congress, not just the Senate, to pass ordinary legislation that supports the so-called 1, 2, 3 agreements we have with other countries around the world to provide them with peaceful civilian nuclear power.
Two questions. First, when you spoke to Trump or other negotiators, did they suggest that the Iranians have expressed any sort of willingness to consider full dismantlement? That's the first question. Second, Senator Graham, you've been in pretty frequent contact with the Saudis while trying to get a deal to normalize relations with Israel. Did the Saudis express to you how they would respond if Iran were to obtain a nuclear weapon?
I'll answer the first part of the question, and I'll just say, as I sometimes do with President Trump, what you see is what you get. What he says to the American people is what he says to me, and I suspect what he says to Senator Graham as well. He's been totally clear in public, and he's repeated that in our conversations, that he wants the Iranian people to live in peace and prosperity, but we cannot allow the Iranian regime to have a nuclear weapon or have a path to a nuclear weapon. That's why total dismantlement of their nuclear program has to be the goal. That's exactly what he said in public and exactly what he said to me in our conversations as well.
Yeah, I can't add any more to that other than I talked to him about that this weekend. And he wants to pursue a diplomatic solution that achieves the goal. And the goal is to make sure they can't have a nuclear bomb by dismantling the process that would allow them to do it. Shut down the path, as Senator Cotton outlined. That is the foundation of any future relationship with Iran. As to Saudi Arabia, I don't want to speak for the country, but I'm fairly involved with them. I think if Iran achieved a nuclear weapon, Saudi and others in the region would act in kind. But they prefer a diplomatic solution. I talked to them yesterday. Dismantlement of Iran's nuclear capability that would lead them to a bomb would be welcome news throughout the region. One last question.
I just ask if you have any reaction to the idea of changing the name of the Persian Gulf. It sounds like Trump might announce this later on. Do you feel like that is something that...
So I think to correct the premise of your question, you mean the Arabian Gulf. As our military has long called it, and as most Arab nations in the region have called it as well, I have no issue with that at all. I think it reflects well on our relationship with our friends on the Arabian Peninsula that are our friends, to use the custom and practice that they do, as opposed to worry about sensitivities with Tehran.
And I will just end it, we have to go here, is how long does this take? What's the end game here? Is to have a peaceful resolution, as we've described, that would be good for the region, good for the world. How much longer will this go on? We're talking weeks, not months, not years. The potential of Iranian breakout looms large here. Israel's desire to bring closure to this issue looms large here. Senator Cotton's desire, my desire to end this debate with some sense of finality looms large here. So we're not talking about long protracted negotiations. It's a pretty clear choice. If you want peaceful nuclear power, here's the requirements to achieve that. If you want to be considered a normal nation, here's what you have to do to be considered normal. These things are fairly clear, not overly complicated. Dismantlement means exactly what we say, dismantle. Read the resolution. A 1, 2, 3 agreement, they're used all over the world. It's nothing exotic. It's beyond the nuclear program, it's the missile program, it's the support for terrorism. So making it clear what they need to do, I think we're helping achieve today. I think the Senate's on board with the Trump approach to solving this problem. But I just want to emphasize, we're talking about weeks, not months.
Honestly, I've been writing those stories for time, so I haven't been listening to a word that was said. Trying to write a story and pull produce, and now I have to run to a different gaggle. I'll be back for it.
You need anything? Or good?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks. I'm just gonna leave my stuff there.
Yeah, no problem.
They just get badass. They don't do that kind of stuff. I mean, the AP style says Gulf of Mexico, so that's what I call it.
We did a podcast script for you, I was like,
I'm from Chicago. We call it the Sears Tower.
trust me. Where's the Sears now?
The last people where the Willis Tower is last week. I don't get.
Still Willis Tower?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's the Sears Tower.
Well, I mean like official. It's government.
Doesn't have a government.
So, I think how my dad's government name is Charles, but he goes by Gregory.
There you go.
He goes by William Gregory. So, all right, let's work on some stuff.
us is totally and completely unacceptable. And House Democrats will continue to strongly oppose it today, tomorrow, this week, next week, and as long as it takes until we can bury this extreme budget in the ground, never to rise again. Questions?
Leader Jeffries, with the president promoting meme coins and stable coins, what are Democrats doing to make sure that this isn't just a new way to gain political access?
There's an ongoing conversation amongst House Democrats led by several different committees, including Financial Services, Judiciary, and House Oversight. And those conversations are actually going to be bicameral as well to address this issue.
Mr. Leader, good morning, thank you. Obviously, I know you're staunch opposition to this bill, but what about a high-tax state like yours when they deal with SALT and provisions in this that your constituents would benefit from having lower taxes if they were to approve that provision? Is that something that they would in fact benefit from? And how do you explain your opposition to the rest of the bill, even if there's benefit in that portion of the bill for them?
Republicans haven't even been able to get their act together on the state and local tax deduction. And the reality is they can't fool the voters. Extreme MAGA Republicans put the state and local tax deduction cap in place, which has cost hard-working American taxpayers thousands of dollars a year. For people all across the country, including in New York. Donald Trump, House Republicans, and Senate Republicans, let's be clear, not a single Democrat supported capping the state and local tax deduction. That was done by Republicans when they enacted the GOP tax scheme. They crashed the car and want to pretend now that they're on a rescue operation. Give me a break. If nothing happens, if there is nothing done with respect to the state and local tax deduction cap by the end of the year, you know what happens? It goes away. So anything that Republicans are doing that relates to a cap actually will increase taxes on the American people, not lower taxes. Let's be clear about that. This whole tax cap situation is phony. They're not reforming a thing. Because literally, if nothing is done, then the $10,000 state and local tax deduction cap goes away on January 1st of next year. The voters are smart enough to know that this whole effort is phony because Republicans imposed the cap in the first place and are doing nothing but tinkering around at the edges as opposed to allowing the cap to disappear, which will happen if nothing is done.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. Can you just talk a little bit about, and again, understanding that you oppose this reconciliation bill, but obviously it looks like Republicans are kind of backing away from like the per capita caps, FMAP. I mean, I know you've been trying to keep the pressure on. Seems like they're coalescing around work requirements. Just, you know, where do you stand on that?
Well, Republicans have already voted, each and every one of them with the exception of Massey, to enact up to $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid, the largest cut to health care in American history. They're already on record that that was their objective. The American people have risen up. Democrats are pushing back aggressively. And so some Republicans are backing off of the effort to try to decimate the health care of the American people. But we're not going to let up because there are still large forces within the House Republican Conference who think that $880 billion in Medicaid cuts is not sufficient. And the reality is, the extreme wings of the House Republican Conference have driven a lot of the agenda. up until this point, and we believe that will continue. And so we'll see what happens if in fact there is a energy and commerce markup next week. But the battle lines have been drawn. Democrats are standing on the side of healthcare and the American people. Republicans, once again, are trying to take it away.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. What's the state of the American dream? And how does your vision specifically make it more competitive than the one Republicans are making?
Republicans are crashing the economy, raising costs, and driving us toward a recession. They are undermining the American dream when they promise to make life more affordable. This majority, this presidency has been a complete and total disaster for working class Americans. They lied all of last year about what their plans were, and now they're trying to do the exact opposite. Firing thousands of veterans? Does that actually enhance the American dream? Taking health care away from hardworking American taxpayers? Does that enhance the American dream? Of course it does not. Actually ripping food out of the mouths of children, families, and veterans. About 20% of households with veterans rely upon the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program for food assistance so that they don't have to go hungry. And this is what they're trying to do. None of this, in terms of the Republican agenda, relates to enhancing the American dream. Our vision, which I began to lay out last week, and that will continue during these second 100 days, recognizes the fact that access to the American dream, of course, has to be earned. You have to work hard. You have to play by the rules. But when you do those two things, which is the case for the overwhelming majority of people in this great country, you should have an affordable home, be able to educate your children, have access to high-quality health care, have a good paying job that allows you to live a comfortable life. And of course, at the end of the day, you should be able to retire with grace and dignity, which is why we want to protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare. That's our vision of the American dream. And it's been our vision going all the way back to FDR and the New Deal, where the foundation was laid, including with Social Security, continuing through Democratic administrations over the decades. And that's the mantle that we inherit. And we know that there are far too many people in this country who are living paycheck to paycheck, and the American dream is broken for them. They shouldn't be struggling to survive in America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world. And so, as this Congress continues, we'll continue to lay out our vision, which is designed to lift people up and make sure that in every single corner, in every single community throughout this country, people have access to the American dream. And the Republicans, whose whole agenda is driven by actually trying to make life better for their billionaire donors, the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected.
A number of Democrats who walked out of a hearing earlier this week on crypto. Can we expect to see similar types of protests moving forward?
Yeah, it wasn't a hearing that they walked out on because there was no actual hearing. Once Ranking Member Maxine Waters objected to the hearing proceeding, pursuant to the rules, the Republicans were unable to have a hearing. So at that point, there was no hearing. It was just a conversation. And some Democrats decided not to participate in that conversation, and other Democrats decided that they were going to participate in that conversation. But no one walked out on a hearing because there was no hearing, given that the Republicans were unable to secure the consent of Maxine Waters. Last row.
A lot of your members are still frustrated about the way things went down with Leader Schumer and the CR in March, and more broadly, the old school way that he and some other Senate Democrats do politics. I know you've said that you stand behind his leadership, but do you have any things that you would like to see him do to adapt to this new political environment?
We're going to continue to work together with our Senate Democratic colleagues in a more is more environment. we all, every single one of us, myself included, has to continue to do more to meet the moment as it relates to an unprecedented assault on the economy, healthcare, Social Security, the rule of law, the American way of life, due process, and democracy. We're in a more is more environment, and that's what all of us are going to continue to do. We've had very constructive and productive conversations with Leader Schumer and our Senate Democratic colleagues about making sure we're in alignment, as we are, in strongly opposing the extreme Republican budget. And then when the moment presents itself, we'll work together as it relates to the end of this fiscal year. Thanks. Second row.
Thank you, Leader. There's a continued bipartisan push.
We'll chat with the mic again.
You know you're in trouble when I show up with this mic, right?
Continued bipartisan effort to get some kind of congressional stock ban in place. I wanted to see if you had any conversations with the Speaker about that yet, or GOP leadership at all. I know where you stand, but if you're having conversations across the aisle on that.
I have not had a conversation with Republican leadership on this issue yet. I strongly support the effort to get this done. Thanks. Kevin?
We are
hometown.
I know. same area. This past week, we've seen Trump kind of wade in a not direct way the governor's race in New York. I'm curious what you make of him endorsing Lawler for New York 17, and in general, as you look to hold on to your cohort of swing seats in New York, is there someone you'd rather see running against Hochul next year, a Stefanik, a Lawler, et cetera?
Well, I think that, Governor Hochul has just demonstrated her incredibly strong leadership as it relates to the most recent budget agreement in Albany, and she is strongly positioned to win re-election against whoever emerges on the Republican side, all of whom basically have functioned as a rubber stamp for Donald Trump's extreme agenda. Every single House Republican in New York and across the country has functioned as a rubber stamp for Donald Trump's extreme agenda. That's the reality of the situation. Mike Lawler is apparently Donald Trump's favorite swing seat Republican in the country. That was a glowing endorsement. They apparently have a very close working relationship. Mike Lawler has clearly been very compliant with the Trump agenda. Otherwise, you're not going to see that kind of endorsement. So it's going to be a very interesting thing for Representative Lawler to have to explain to the people that he represents in New York's 17th congressional district why he has such a close relationship with someone who I can guarantee you, meaning Donald Trump, is deeply underwater in terms of favorability in Westchester and in Rockland. Stay on this side, okay.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Leader Jeffries. So the Senate is voting on a resolution that repeals a Biden administration policy. It allowed schools and libraries to lend Wi-Fi hotspots to students. Senator Cruz says that the FCC's rule is illegal, raises taxes, and puts kids at risk due to a lack of limits on their broadband. Now, there is a version of this that was introduced in the House. I want to get your thoughts on it. Should the House take something like this up? And I want to know where you stand on keeping access versus those concerns, because a lot of schools in New York actually utilize this kind of program.
Well, we obviously want to maximize access to the internet and high-speed internet in particular in this information age that we're living in. And so, from my standpoint, we would closely scrutinize anything that's being done that would actually limit access to public school children across America, particularly in urban America and in rural America and in small-town America, which have been struggling in terms of access to high-speed internet. And that's why Democrats under the leadership of President Biden and Vice President Harris were aggressively leaning into this area. Again, I just don't understand, like, why Why are Republicans doing these things that clearly hurt the American people? They're gonna have to explain themselves. They're running away from town hall meetings. Democrats continue to run toward town hall meetings. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of the American people? I think the answer is because they are actively doing things to hurt the American people. And this may be another example of that.
Will you push against if Speaker Johnson brings it up?
Well, I've got to take a look at what actually comes to the House floor, and I'm unfamiliar with the provision in the Senate.